and I'm with Westwater Research. Our presenters will be discussing California's first open source water accounting and trading platform today. This tool allows water stakeholders in the state to track, use, and trade their water supplies. I'll let our presenters introduce themselves, but before I do, some bookkeeping items. You'll see to the right of your screen a poll section and a handout section. Handouts that our presenters have prepared for you with some background information on who they are and what the platform is. Please feel free to download these documents, which will include background information on the platform and a link to a story map, which shows exactly how this platform works from soup to nuts. Well, almost, anyhow. Also, this webinar will be recorded and available to you later, so don't sweat it. We will be making this available, and you can share with your colleagues as you wish. At this time, please go to the poll section. And the poll question is basically, who are you? Where do you all come from? What sector do you come from? And we have some suggestions that you can click on. So we'll just give that poll a few minutes to populate. Interesting. A lot of others, which is good. It's good to have folks that aren't typically involved with these sorts of things. And just so everyone knows, the chat function is set to private. So not everyone can see your questions, but I see a few folks are asking about the polls, where they are. It's in the upper right corner of your screen. It says polls right next to handouts. Without further ado, let's introduce everyone. Bryce, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, wonderful. Peter, thank you so much for taking us through all of that, and everybody here joining us today. We're excited to have you be a part of this webinar. Joining me are Eric Averett from Rosedale-Rio Bravo and Christina Babbitt from the Environmental Defense Fund. I'm going to start with a short presentation here, introducing myself, Westwater Research, as well as providing some brief background in California's water market and SGMA, and then allow Christina and Eric to introduce themselves and this wonderful platform that we've been able to collaborate on and develop together. Here. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Bryce McAteer. I'm with Westwater Research, and we are a water resources advisory, transaction, and policy advising firm. What I like to say is that we operate really at the confluence of water and value. We've been in business for the past 20 years, assisting government, nonprofit, agricultural, and private clients across the Western United States achieve their water supply management goals. And one of the things that we do across the Western U.S. is track water markets and track water transfers from state to state within local and regional and multi-regional markets. This research really allows us to get a better understanding of what is the price and who are participants in this market, and advise our clients accordingly. But importantly, because these markets are really diverse, it allows us to have insights into how these markets are structured to provide background for other areas that may be considering developing markets, such as here in California, as a result of SGMA, as there's been a lot of conversation around potentially how to use allocations, transfers, and trading to be one of the multifaceted parts of how we achieve sustainability up and down the state. Now, water transfers are not really a new thing here in California. Rather, water transfers have really been an active part of how we strategically manage water supply across the state. We see transfers in our surface water systems through, among various users and among various natural systems, as well as within major project systems like the State Water Project and Central Valley Project. We've also seen markets arise in the groundwater regions of the state, particularly in adjudicated basins, as well as transfers of stored and banked water. There's a lot of different factors that influence really price and demand, a lot of those being ecological, regulatory, and other factors. And so I want to provide you with a brief overview of kind of what we've seen in the market, and how we anticipate that may be a continually active part in the SGMA strategy as folks move forward. In terms of California's spot market, which is really the single year transfers and exchanges, we see a lot of price variability in the surface water systems. That variability is largely attributable to hydrologic conditions and supply conditions. What we see is in dry years and critically dry years, the price tends to rise, as well as the volatility of price tends to rise, whereas in average and wet years, relative to those dry years, those prices are lower. Now, there's a difference between the surface water and the groundwater market that we've observed historically, which is that in many groundwater markets, prices are far less variable. That is oftentimes a function of placement fee or similar fees, wherein a water district or water master that's helping manage those groundwater areas will bring in excess additional supplies to make up for overuse among the participants. Now, there's a number of different drivers of demand within the water market and drivers for transfers. I'm not going to go through all of them here today, but one of those is, of course, supply. What we see is that the water market really responds to water supply availability in the surface water systems. So in years that are relatively dry, the volume of transfers tends to be much higher versus in average and wet years. Although one important thing to consider, and one thing that we've observed here in recent years, is in wet years, particularly in 2019, where allocations were relatively high, we saw proportionally more water being transferred as we're preparing for SGMA, largely putting that water aside in recharge basins and trying to get ahead of the curve as folks are moving forward. Another major demand driver is agricultural transition. One thing that we've seen is that as annual crops have been replaced with permanent crop acreage, there's been continual demand hardening in the agricultural sector, and so spot market buyers are increasingly agricultural participants. Now, SGMA really presents a new era for water management. Enacted in 2014, I think many of us are familiar with this. The Act requires basins to achieve sustainability by either 2040 or 42, dependent upon their priority. And achieving sustainability is a multifaceted effort. It requires GSAs, the new local agencies, to monitor and gather data. Many of them are looking at strategies to augment their supplies or manage their demand. And it also involves things like funding. How do we fund our agency, fund our projects, and governance? How do we govern ourselves? How do we coordinate with other governing agencies in our basin, as well as in adjacent basins? Now, one thing that is really exciting is that as we move into managing and implementing SGMA, a lot of this is going to involve on the ground interaction with growers, with individual participants and entities, and SGMA has really opened up the door for democratized water management. So we're really excited to have partnered with EDF and with Rosedale in developing this fantastic accounting platform and trading platform, which will allow growers to really manage their supplies, manage the implementation of SGMA, and really can be a fantastic tool for agencies and districts across the state in implementing SGMA. But before we get into that, I'm going to hand it on over to Christina, and she can take you through what that looks like.
Perfect. Thank you, Bryce. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, so just give me a minute. Okay, well, let's do this. And we'll see what pops up. Tell me when you guys see the presentation. Is everyone seeing the presentation? Do you see? Let's see.
Almost there. We can see your screen.
Okay, so let me just pull up the presentation. Bryce did this a lot more
Perfect.
elegantly than I did. Okay, lots of different platforms to get used to. Well, thanks for your patience, everyone. My name is Christina Babbitt. I work for Environmental Defense Fund. It is a real pleasure to be here today. I'm really excited to share some work that we've done to develop and launch an open source online water accounting and trading platform in partnership with Rosedale-Rio Bravo, Sickett Technology Group, Westwater Research, OpenET, and Olson. The platform was designed to enable water managers and landowners to develop more accurate water budgets, to facilitate water trading, and minimize undesirable results through the use of a groundwater modeling decision support tool. So this graphic that you're seeing on the screen illustrates the main features of the platform. It's one platform with multiple functions, and it was co-created with a group of small and large landowners in Rosedale who will actually be the users of the platform. So at its core, the platform is an accounting platform, and it allows landowners and water district staff to track their annual water allocations and current water usage in near real time. The water use data in the platforms comes from OpenET, which is a web-based platform being developed by NASA, EDF, Google, Desert Research Institute, and many others. OpenET uses satellite-based data to calculate evapotranspiration, which is a key water metric, particularly well-suited for use in Rosedale. And water managers can also input water supply data into the platform to create detailed water budgets. And then together with this water use and water supply information, we are able to provide landowners with a water budget for the year and a page that they can go to actually see all that information. The platform also features a water manager dashboard to track and account for water use across the entire district, which then will eventually inform billing within Rosedale. The platform has the option to add on water trading functionality, which needs to be built on top of the accounting portion of the platform to allow landowners to more flexibly manage their water resources. And the platform can also integrate with a groundwater modeling decision support tool to better understand potential impacts and benefits of management strategies before those strategies are actually acted upon. And so with this overview, I'll briefly highlight a few components of the platform. I'm first going to navigate to the accounting portion of the platform, and this is an example of a landowner page where a user can go to understand how much water they have and the parcels being managed. And so I'm first going to show you the water budget overview. There's a lot of information on here, and I'll go through this kind of quickly, but I'll show you where you can access all of this after the presentation. So under the water budget overview, you can see the acres managed, you can see the allocation that this user has been given, and you can see any purchased or sold water, and all of these tabs can be expanded. You can also see the total water supply. If you look over to the right, you can see a graph of water use, and you can look at past water use up through near real-time data. And you can also see the allocation that this landowner has been given, and you can see projections and either where they exceed that allocation or where they might be under that allocation. In this case, they're a little bit over, so if there's water trading, they might want to purchase some additional water. And one other feature I want to dive into a little bit more is I'm going to expand this allocation tab just through screenshots. And I think it's really important to understand that there's different types of water, and different types of water have different rules associated with its use. And this is really important to inform an accounting system. So this can be tailored to your specific district or your GSA. But for example, in Rosedale, native yield is water that has to be used on overlying land, whereas project water, which is water that is brought into the district and made available for landowner use, will eventually be able to be traded, but it won't be able to be carried over. And so there's lots of nuance in that, and it's really important to understand the district policies as well as potential legal implications for how that water can be used. And so this accounting platform can really help with that. So next, I'll briefly highlight a water trading page. If you go to the trade menu, buy and sell water, you can see a bulletin type trading platform. We heard loud and clear from users that they wanted something simple to use, and this allows people to come and either post a posting to buy or sell water, or view available postings that are in the system. And you can even negotiate on the terms of the trade. But once the trade is finalized, each of the users then needs to go into the platform to register the trade so that it can be recognized within the eyes of the district and then incorporated into the accounting portion of the platform. So I'm going to highlight just one last feature of the platform, and the water accounting and trading platform has the ability to integrate with other advanced analysis tools. So one example is the work that we've done with Olson, which is an engineering firm out of Lincoln, Nebraska, to leverage their groundwater evaluation toolbox application. And this is a really helpful application, web-based application that can execute multiple models of a groundwater basin to model water management scenarios before these actions are taken. So I have on the screen just a screenshot of one example. You can see this play out on our demo video, but this is a hypothetical example of a water trade. So the parcel in red is the purchaser of water. They purchased the right to pump water. And then the blue parcel is the seller of water. So they are no longer pumping. And you can see the resulting groundwater level changes through time and how, what impacts changes in pumping patterns have. And with this scenario, we've overlaid a disadvantaged community layer in addition to rural drinking water well locations. And it's really great because you can see the potential trade-offs that could occur, and you can incorporate a lot of different types of data based on those trade-offs that you want to assess. You can integrate water quality information, the location of groundwater dependent ecosystems. Another scenario that we have is looking at different recharge basins and where you might want to put excess water if you then have it. And so these types of scenarios really will help you inform management rules for different trading programs or other programs that you implement, but will allow you to evaluate actions and activity through time. And so with that, this is my last slide. This is a screenshot of the accounting and trading platform, and you'll notice EDF branding on this page. And so what we've done is created a replica of the Rosedale platform, which anonymizes landowner data. And so by accessing this demonstration platform, you have full access to the functionality of the landowner pages and the manager pages. And you can access that at the first link on the screen and sign up to use that site. And then, as Peter mentioned, we also have a story map, which is a nice kind of short overview of the project. And with that, I'll turn it over to Eric and hopefully more successfully stop sharing my screen.
All right. Well, thank you, Christina. And I don't have any slides to share, so I won't.
You got saved.
Yeah. So, I think Bryce introduced a little bit of the what on the accounting and trading platform, and Christina touched on both the what and the how. And my job, I think, is to touch on the why. And I recall early on, even prior to SGMA, as many of us went out into the community to talk a little bit about SGMA and prepare or educate landowners.
Hey, Eric, are you still with us?
Yeah.
I can actually hear Eric. You can't, Bryce?
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm looking at the chat line, so.
And I'm looking at the chat line. Looks like
okay, maybe it's just Bryce. So yeah. As I traveled around, I looked and recognized that the most common question that people were asking is, how much can I pump? And so my job is to connect the need for the platform and bring it down to the landowner level. And the easiest way to do that is we recognized very quickly that land use decisions for the first time with the implementation of SGMA were connected to water supply availability. And very much like many of us have an app on our phone that allows us to look at our financial condition or our bank account. Maybe before we go to make a purchase, we check it and make sure, okay, I have sufficient funds to make this purchase. We wanted to create that connection or that information to inform landowner decisions relative to, am I going to plant a crop in the fall, or am I going to, replant for the long term? And so the water accounting platform gives the landowner, as Christina mentioned, almost real-time water budget information so that they can kind of make decisions. Underlying the whole premise of SGMA is a balanced water budget. All of the undesirable results, or almost all of them, are directly linked to this concept of sustainability, which is tied to a balanced water supply. And so the water accounting platform really gives landowners information to make informed decisions. And then the market side of it provides landowners access to, as they evaluate their timeline as it goes through the year, whether or not they may be in a position to have a surplus and put it into the market and generate some additional value or return, or maybe they are going to go slightly over and they're looking at becoming a buyer and they want to know what's available or what's out there for them. So the why is really just to empower landowners to make informed decisions and not depend on the district. Imagine again, if you will, that you can only look at your bank account once a year, but yet you have to live within this budget for the entire year. So the water accounting platform gives landowners the information they need to make land use decisions and be responsible and take ownership of the requirements of SGMA. And so with that, hopefully I didn't take too much time, but I guess we're going to open it up for questions.
Yeah, that's great, Eric. Thanks so much for your input there. Yeah, I guess we'll just start her off with, I guess the first question is to Christina. Christina, so SGMA has brought sustainable groundwater management to the forefront of local water policy. Why did the EDF want to develop this platform? And this is kind of interesting, kind of point number two. What is the value of it being open source?
Yeah, great question. Great question, Peter. And I think my answers might tie together to the different parts of that question. I think when you think about sustainable groundwater management, water accounting is really key, right? You need to understand how much water you have access to, what the needs within the basin are, who can use that water. And so making it really easy for landowners and water managers to have that information in one system, especially with so many changes that are going on with SGMA right now, I think is really critical. As many of you know, we have over 250 GSAs that have formed, multiple management entities under these GSAs. So we really need tools that can be tailored to local needs, but then also that can be scaled more broadly. And you can imagine that, yes, water accounting is really helpful in Rosedale, and it's going to be a really great tool. But then also when you think about maybe scaling that platform more broadly across the GSA or across, it could really help with SGMA, and it could really help understand the accounting of the basin, and also allow for the implementation of other tools such as trading, but to be done in a really thoughtful way. And then in terms of open source, I think there's so many needs out there right now with SGMA implementation, and to the extent that we can make these resources available at lower cost, make them more accessible to water managers, and then allow them to scale more easily, ultimately we want people to use it, and we want the tool to be able to talk across different management entity boundaries if possible.
I guess the next question is for Eric. Eric, Rosedale really helped spearhead this effort by working with its stakeholders, and you guys were really the pioneer of using this platform with the stakeholders. How did the district's involvement come to be, and why did you get involved?
So Bryce, help me remember. I call him the guy from Australia. Mike, what was his last name?
Mike Young.
Mike Young, thank you. So there was a gentleman from Australia that came and did a presentation on kind of the Australian model, and I think we hosted several workshops, and I think learned a lot from their experience. And so I think it was a combination of recognizing what was available, and then also it was landowner feedback that was very positive, is what kind of got Rosedale interested in piloting this and seeing if it was something that landowners would be interested in or find of value.
It's always interesting to hear input from Australia. They do quite a lot of interesting things with water management there. Next question is for Christina. Christina, as you described earlier, the system has a lot of moving parts or working parts, a lot of functionalities. Why is it important to have all of these different sort of modules, if you will, in one place? And are there components future users might want to consider integrating?
Yeah, I think there's so many resources and tools out there, right? And I think by putting, the accounting and the trading and kind of the ability to run scenarios in one place makes it easier for people to perhaps use. Ultimately, we wanted to develop something that people would use. There's not multiple platforms to navigate, different systems, different passwords. And also when you think about the accounting portion of the platform, that's something that, landowners and water managers are going to use throughout the year, right? There might be times when, if you add the functionality of the trading, that you might want to trade, and that's going to come in and out. But there's this foundation of a system that exists and will be continually used. And so I think, having those together, and then maybe I'm going to tie this in here, and hopefully it's somewhat related, but I also think it's important when you think about the trajectory of how you develop some of these management tools, right? So accounting, as I've mentioned several times, is really the foundation, but there's really kind of a trajectory that needs to be developed when you think about trading programs, right? So you need to understand your water availability, how much you have to use, and then you need to work on allocations and who can use how much water and what are those rules associated with it. And so, by doing that, you can build a really good foundation to implement a trading program that users buy into if they're a part of those processes.
Bryce, next question for you. Water transfer has been an important part of California's water management in general. What do you see them playing with regards to SGMA specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would look at this in two different ways. I think that there are the water transfers that really happen kind of in the major state and federal systems, and I think water transfers are going to continue to be an important part of how water is managed in the state of California. I mean, even among the state water project contractors who in the past, they've had some policies around how they're allowed to trade and transfer water. In the last couple of years, there have been some shifts about how they want to expand the flexibility for individual contractors to manage and transfer water supplies. And so I think in terms of how we manage water across California, there continues to be a growing openness to identifying transfers as a really important tool to improve the optimization and flexibility with which we manage water supplies across the state. I think in terms of SGMA in general, one of the trends that we've been seeing here in the last wet year in 2019 was that folks who typically in a wet year are not participants in the water market, who typically allow for those supplies to pass by, we saw increased demand for wet year water. And so I think as we see new banking projects and recharge projects be a part of kind of the SGMA strategy of some GSAs and districts, we'll also see growing demand for wet year water supplies as well, which is an interesting new dynamic. But it's really important to make sure the state's able to capture as much of its available water resources as possible as we transition through achieving sustainability through SGMA. I think at a local level, depending on the GSA or the district, we may also see, and we are seeing, districts start to innovate with how they consider utilizing allocations, individual transfers, and really giving growers and entities within those GSAs new tools for water supply management. And as part of that, we anticipate that in some districts, transfers individually among growers and among other entities will be an important part of how they participate in their GSA's overall sustainability strategy. In districts already, there are transfers of surface water supplies among individual entities. And so now I think we're really just integrating all the different parts of the water supplies available within these areas, the groundwater, the district water, and other water that's brought in. I think one thing that's really exciting and important, as Christina had pointed out in the accounting platform overview, for example, in Rosedale, there's different types and colors of water. And so I anticipate that there will also be some complexity around how folks utilize those resources. There'll be some good decision making around that. But I think really this platform creates a fantastic new tool that other districts can consider adopting as they move forward. And transfers will continue to be an important part of how we manage water sustainably in the state.
Next question I had for you, but about how to incorporate some of these trends we're seeing into GSA specifically, and what they should consider when doing so. So that's fantastic, interesting. Yeah, I guess the next question is for Eric. Eric, how does Rosedale intend to use this platform to implement SGMA? And well, let's start with that question, and I could have a follow-up question.
By going off script, I've seen a lot of questions in the right-hand column, and I think perhaps if I could do a lightning round and hit some of them, because the questions I think are much more interesting than
Yeah.
what I've got. So let me do a lightning round, and hopefully I can get to all the questions that I've seen so far. So the platform was received very well by landowners. We had workshops and stakeholder interest groups where they actually got to develop the platform. So while we created a framework, they were able to weigh in and give specific information on functionality, usability, how it should look and feel. And so they were very, very supportive of that. The question was, is the training and the accounting limited to the boundaries of the district? The answer is yes. We don't have any authority outside of our district, and so it is limited to that. Excellent question on landowners. Can they see other landowners' information? And that's a very, very important part of the platform, and we spent a lot of time on it. And that was, you only can log in and see the information for the APN, or the assessor's parcel that you own, and you do not see any other information. OpenET versus actual groundwater use. We find a very strong correlation. And actually, I'm of the opinion, although it's newer technology, that it's actually much more accurate than trying to meter and do calculations on what the tree is using and what's returning to the groundwater basin. No, Rosedale is not a closed system. It does not acknowledge the outflow, the subsurface outflow in a groundwater basin, but we have a groundwater model that we use to calculate that. Our board was very interested and involved in the development of the platform. Their primary interest was data and making sure that they had good, accurate data to make decisions with. Yes, OpenET will allow us to avoid metering within the district, and we find that to be both a cost savings, but again, we feel that the data is actually more accurate. The platform is the basis of our GSP and reporting, and so it is an integral part of our groundwater sustainability plan as being reviewed by DWR. And then also I had another question about, does the platform integrate with newer technology? And the answer is yes. In fact, just recently we integrated with the CIMMYS, California Irrigation Management System, weather stations in order to improve the accuracy of OpenET with weather stations proximate to Rosedale. So sorry, I know we've got some time set up to do questions, but there's a lot. I didn't want to miss them because your questions are really good.
And Eric, I might just add on to the last part of that question. You know, for Rosedale, we use the OpenET data and the CIMMYS data, but I think that could also be tailored to different regions as you look at scaling the platform, depending on what data is available. And if you have metering data, you could pull that into the system.
Yep. So sorry for going off script, guys.
I'm looking at all these great questions, and the beauty of this group we have here is that, you know, if you look at the poll, we have folks from all different sectors, and it's nice to get these different perspectives. You know, to talk about the technology, I mean, it's an open source platform, folks, so you can integrate a lot of different things that meet your specific needs if you want, and that's one of the strengths of it, and what really excites me anyhow. Well, let's just get back on script, I suppose. You know, a core piece of this platform is water use accounting, you know, so accounting and then later on trading. But, yeah, tell us more about OpenET and how you see this effort contributing to the future of sustainable water management in the state.
Yeah, you know, I think the foundation of any accounting platform is accurate, trusted data on water consumption, and that's really, you know, why we've turned to OpenET. You know, we've kind of described a little bit about what OpenET is, and, you know, one of the applications that we're using it for in Rosedale in terms of water budgeting and tracking water balance in near real time. There's a lot of other applications, and we have a number of end use cases that we're working on through the program. You know, I think it's going to enable local water managers to develop more flexible and creative incentive-driven conservation programs, driven by real data that can credit participants for real change in water use. And it can be used by farmers at the field scale and, you know, incorporated into ranch management and other irrigation management software to maximize crop per drop and reduce costs and help the bottom line. Eric, I don't know if you have anything to add. You've touched a little bit on OpenET, but you've been really involved in the project as well.
Yeah, just for many, it's new, and there's lots and lots of questions around it. but the technology is there. It's very sound. I mentioned previously that you know, there's a number of variables or assumptions that go into trying to use a meter on a well, you know, when you start compounding the margin of error for each of those, it becomes pretty significant. And I will say that we've actually field tested the OpenET data within Kern County at 2 different sites and found it more accurate than even meters with soil probes. And so I think we have some work to do in the water industry to educate people and to make sure that you know, the data is calibrated and that we're getting good information from it. But it's an exciting new technology and one that hopefully will continue to grow in adoption.
Well, I guess we'll just ask the big question that's kind of the elephant in the room, the one for me anyway, and this is for you, Christina. You know, how can other GSAs or districts use this platform exactly?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about it being open source, right? And so I think there's an opportunity for, you know, others to learn more about the tool, the different functionality, the accounting, the trading. I think ultimately when you think about management across an entire basin versus within all of these, you know, smaller management entities, I think there's a greater opportunity to accomplish the goals that we want to achieve under SGMA through more coordination. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to, when you look across the landscape, to recognize if you work together where the multiple benefits are, where you want to avoid impacts. And so by creating this platform with multiple functions that's open source, ultimately we want people to use the platform. And so the next phase of the project is really going to focus on how can we scale this project. We've, you know, I think we've developed a really great tool for Rosedale, but that doesn't mean that's the end of the project, right? So as we scale this project, you know, what does it look like to, you know, have this accounting platform work across management areas, and what kind of trust needs to be brought into the project, and what kind of features need to be added, and how do you tailor this to different regions, and then what does that look like then when you scale it up? And so we're really excited about that next phase, and if others are interested in learning more or how you can participate, please get in touch.
Point, Christina, about how this really is a local issue, and you know, stakeholder engagement is at the forefront of this, and I think everyone involved in this first iteration of it, if you will, really believes that and you know, stresses that. Without it, you can't have something that's trustworthy, quite simply. Well, gosh, we have questions, as Eric pointed out earlier. Bryce, we haven't asked you a question in a minute. I'm getting some questions about the NASDAQ Bellis Water Index, the futures contract as well that is announced. Can you talk briefly about how that might interplay with this form, and maybe give a brief background on what that is for folks that aren't interested or aren't aware of it?
Yeah, no, of course. So for those of you who are perhaps a little bit less familiar, one of the things that we've been working on as Westwater is a partnership with Bellis and NASDAQ and CME to develop a water futures index, and now also a water pricing index for the state of California, as well as an associated futures product, which is really exciting. That was recently announced and launched here in the last week or so. And one of the things that we've been working on is having identified some of the difficulty that some folks have in the state in accessing additional water supplies. Is there a way to create sort of a risk management tool through a financial product where in which you can hedge against the risk of water supply? And so in years that may be dry in the future, while the future product doesn't necessarily provide you with a water supply, when that contract is completed, it provides a financial hedge, a potential payout that grower, district, an insurance entity, or somebody else to manage the financial risk associated with water supply risk. And so what we do as Westwater Research is, we evaluate water transfers across the state of California, and that helps inform then that water pricing index. And so we're really looking at this futures product that can help growers as well as districts manage the financial risk associated with water supply risk. And so for growers, as they're looking at how they're going to be implementing SGMA, and how they're going to interact with a potential accounting platform like this. It allows them to consider what their district water management policies are. What does the water supply look like? Do they have access to supplemental water supplies? And considering financially how they then can also hedge other risks associated with access or lack of access to water supplies. So we're really excited to have launched that, and we'll be continuing to provide some more information on that in the future as well.
I guess Eric, okay, well, all of you, at this point, I guess chat with or engage with the folks asking questions. And I'm so glad, Eric, you addressed some of those questions already. They're all really interesting. Eric, one that came to my mind for you, perhaps, and maybe this isn't the best for you, but let me know, is Leita asked if each district is using its own accounting method vendor for ET rather than having everyone use the same, are the units values transferable? And this is, interesting question about how different districts communicate to one another. Can you perhaps speak about that?
Sure. So I would compare that to maybe one district is using one particular brand of meter and another district is using another. The methodology is the same. OpenET is measuring a temperature reference, and there are different algorithms that are used. What we would do in that situation, and so actually the district adjacent to me is using a different system. But what we can do is compare the values that are coming off of particular fields. And so we would maybe calibrate, if you will, or verify by looking at a crop of almonds and a crop of alfalfa and a crop of pistachios, and looking at the relative difference between the two methodologies to ensure that there's some standard, if you will. But I would expect that there's vendors out there right now that are kind of marketing their platform. Our job as water managers is just to make sure that they're within the bounds of reason.
Christina, did you want to take a question? Did you have one in mind? I had one for I thought would be interesting for you to answer, but please choose one if you had one, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm looking through, and there's a lot of great questions, and I think one of the questions got at kind of, I think, why EDF is involved in some of this work. And I think I touched a little bit on that in terms of the importance of accounting. But I think we also recognize that trading is going to happen within the state. And I think there's a good role for us to play in terms of how can we develop tools to make it easier for folks to make good decisions, right? And so I think, thinking thoughtfully about how these programs are designed based on, accounting systems that offer, readily accessible information to people to make good decisions. But then I also think, when you think about trading, and obviously that's going to change how water moves across the landscape. And, that's why we were really excited to work with the Olson team so we can better understand and assess, implications of management actions. And it goes well beyond trading. You can think about recharge and water quality and all these different management actions that are going to come into play under SGMA. And how can you provide tools that can take advantage of all the great data and perhaps highlight gaps in data that we need to inform some of the decisions that we're making. So I think EDF is really involved in, making it easier to make good decisions, build more resilient water systems, and then make this information really accessible and to account for some of the things that we care about, like communities and environment and people and livelihoods.
Is there a question that piqued your interest, or do you want me to go one your way, perhaps?
Feel free to send one my way. There's so many of these wonderful questions coming over here.
Yeah, well, we got one by Chase. Oh, please go ahead, Christina.
I was just going to say there's a question about OpenET and the cost of, I think, the data versus other data. You can visit the OpenET platform, but the goal of that project is really to make that data freely available or available at a very low cost. And I don't know if, Eric, you have anything to add on that point.
Yeah, I can't offer it for free because it's a service provided by a group, but there are costs of developing the software and whatnot. So, but we're fortunate right now to be able to have access to it under this pilot program at no cost.
this one could just go to the floor. There's a question about, do you foresee any or see any major unresolved legal and or regulatory permitting obstacles that would impede widespread adoption across elsewhere in the state? What do you all think?
I mean, I think one thing when you think about scaling up a system, right, you need to really understand the nuances and what you're developing the system for and what needs you're trying to meet, right? And so the needs in Rosedale, I think, are probably similar to other places, but there's a lot of nuance in that. And so I think when you design these systems, you have to kind of have that locale in mind and those particular needs. And then when it's scaled, okay, well, how does that differ? And that really involves stakeholder participation and really understanding what the users want, what they're actually going to need. And then it's that when we developed the accounting platform in Rosedale, there were a lot of meetings with stakeholder groups in terms of, okay, what do you need? What would you actually use? And then it's an iterative process. And I think that is going to be the same. And it's not necessarily going to be an easy process. Look at the Sigma process and bringing groups together, but we need to have these conversations and think about how these tools can be applicable at scale.
Critical to make this work on the ground level. It's one thing to have a fancy, shiny tool, but people aren't using it or interested in using it, it won't work, of course. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to get to this question about pricing. Maybe this, like, let's open this to the floor as well. Chase here asked about how water pricing related to sales and purchases will be managed. Does the platform suggest pricing based on location and et cetera? I know trading is something that's going to come down further on, but maybe you guys want to just touch on that briefly?
Yeah, so, and this is in response, there was a couple of other questions that were asking about the type of information that would be publicly viewed. The trading platform is really set up to facilitate landowner interaction, and the district is not involved in the transaction at all. And so what happens is, for example, if Bryce is a seller and I'm a buyer, Bryce would post information on the platform. I would be able to see it, and then I would initiate contact with Bryce. We would negotiate the terms and conditions. And then once we had completed the necessary arrangements between us, we would go back into the platform to confirm the trade. But there's no obligation that Bryce or I disclose anything other than the amount of water being transferred. And that was kind of a policy that we developed. We didn't want the district involved in the financial side of the transaction. It's really the landowner's ability or discretion to do so. I think there's an option that they can disclose it, but it's voluntary.
See here.
And maybe I can just pick another question. I think maybe it would be worth a conversation in terms of trading. So right now in Rosedale, the accounting portion of the platform rolled out in March, and the trading portion hasn't officially launched, although I know Eric and his board are working on kind of the rules that would be then associated with trading to bring that online. I think there's a desire to first kind of demonstrate scarcity and the need for the trading, and then to design the rules on what that would look like. And so that's where something like the Olson tool can become really important. And I see a couple of questions in terms of, how would you assess, different impacts to drinking water users or to others? And I think that's where the Olson tool offers a really powerful message, right? So first of all, there are a lot of data gaps, right, out there. And so one, we need to start bringing in the data that we have to inform the decisions that we're making. And I think these tools can inform rules, but they can also help evaluate the system through time. So, obviously this is a decision for Eric and his board, but, they can look at the trades that have occurred, through different periods and see what is happening to water levels, and then put protections in place as they move forward. So it really is, a process, a tool to kind of inform rules, but then also evaluate through time. And maybe Eric can respond to that. But then there was another question in terms of if an environmental user could participate in a trade. And I think that really depends on how you design the system. We have recommendations for best practices, and we think that those are really important in designing a well thought out system. And it really is, you know, up to the users of the platform to really think about those and then develop the system moving forward. But I think in Rosedale, if you're a landowner, you can participate. So a group like the Nature Conservancy, I don't know if they have any property in Kern or in Rosedale, but, you know, as a landowner, you know, with an allocation, they could perhaps participate in the trade, but I think it would depend on the nuance. And you can ground check me on any of that, Eric, because I may not be totally accurate.
No, that's accurate. Just looking at the question, and Anona put one in there about allocations, and I think it's important that when Christina had her slide up, she showed the different types of water. So there was native yield, project water, reconciliation, stored water, and precip. And out of all of those, there's only one that's available for transfer in the water market, and that is project water. And that's the water that the district provides. And so it doesn't require any adjudicatory level analysis because it is water that the district has discretion as to how it's transferred. And so we did not touch any of those other sources, specifically the native yield, because it does get into overlying rights and a whole host of issues that we're not prepared to deal with. And then there was another question about carryover. And there was a line item called reconciliation. And so a landowner, with the exception of the category called stored water, does not have the ability to carry over water. And so what happens is, to the extent that a landowner has a supply that's not used and they don't put it into the market, it becomes a block of water that the district then reconciles or reallocates to all users proportional to acreage. So there's no carryover provision, except again that component of what we call stored water.
Let's see. So many great questions here. It's hard to choose. Bryce, did any thing pique your interest? I'm sorry, I meant to ask you earlier.
Yeah, and sorry guys, I've had some IT issues, so unfortunately the hearing's been a little tough on my end. But I think you know, one of the questions I've seen is around you know, water pricing. That's something that's really important to consider. You know, what we see in the water market is that pricing, particularly in the surface water market, is highly variable and depend on hydrology. Now, in a system where perhaps, such as, you know, within Rosedale, you know, if you're implementing a system of allocations, when associated fees and other things, I think there are some other prices that you should consider. So, for example, in adjudicated areas, there's oftentimes a fee or a replacement fee that folks pay if they use above and beyond what their allocation is, and that reimburses the agency or the water master to acquire supplies to then replenish the basin on their behalf. And so I think, you know, one thing that'll be interesting to see as folks innovate and as potentially, you know, allocation and transfer systems become more common among GSAs is going to be that pricing variability between, if there is some sort of a cap or replacement fee or, you know, a tiered fee pricing structure, that will likely influence the prices within that folks are willing to pay for the other water supplies that they're allocated, and then may transfer among one another. I had also seen an interesting question around, you know, is this going to integrate into you know, surface water transfers if folks were to bring in water or transfer water out of a district? And I think the beauty of you know, what's been developed here is that those components can be added on. I think, you know, the flexibility that the district wants to incorporate into a system like this is really going to be a result of, you know, their engagement with their stakeholders, what their existing rules and regulations are, which are really important to consider. But definitely this tool is something that I see as really a great service to growers, to other participants in the GSA's overall SGMA strategy. And so if there are other things that are important for the district to consider, or other, you know, I'd like to call them services that would be helpful for growers in managing, you know, their overall water supply portfolio, I think those are things that can definitely be added in, and likely we may see some of those innovations down the line in other areas that adopt, you know, the platform like this.
Ask about the role of the State Water Board and the development of this. I think it would behoove us to address that. Like a lot of folks are interested. What would you all say about that?
And Peter, I might combine that with another question that gets at kind of, have you considered state level, this is a state level tool to understand regional transfers? Because I think that gets at the kind of the broader statewide utility of some of the work that we're doing and maybe the role that the state could play. And Eric, I saw you maybe opening your mouth, so I might have jumped in front of you, so please feel free to add on to this. But yeah, I think it's really important to understand like surface water and groundwater, and we've moved surface water up and down the state through many ways. And I think with groundwater, at least in my opinion, groundwater is very local, right? So really thinking about how you manage groundwater within the basin, and maybe thinking about that and getting that right. And then, maybe not talking right now about out of basin transfers, but, and I also think about how you can think about surface and groundwater as an interconnected resource in many places, and going beyond just surface or groundwater and to kind of manage the system. And so in terms of the state role, I think there's, a lot of opportunity, one, to kind of develop some best practices for how some of these systems might be used, especially if you're talking about, managing at the basin level and kind of what those trading programs might look like. And I also think there's opportunity for the state to kind of support some of these good management strategies that have been put in place. I think there's a lot of folks on the ground with SGMA. It's very new, and kind of what are strategies or tools that are kind of more acceptable, or kind of, and I know that puts the Department of Water Resources perhaps in a hard position. They might not be willing to say, like, we're going to endorse this tool, but I do think any kind of guidance that can be given to managers, as they move forward is really helpful. And so, Eric, would love to hear any thoughts you have.
Yeah, I don't see a role for the state board or others, and maybe that is because I'm looking at this as a very limited tool at this point, with a lot of constraints as far as the size and scale of transfers. And so for the group's benefit, just a couple of things. Number one, and sometimes the concept of market implies something substantially larger. And I think that, we took the approach that this is a pilot so we could learn and initiate transactions and see what works and what doesn't. And from those lessons, perhaps grow it. And I think certainly in Rosedale, our vision is that if we can get this somewhat close, then we can talk to our neighbors, because we recognize that this may be a tool that allows landowners to move water from one district to another. And again, the goal is to help landowners meet the requirements of SGMA with the least economic harm. And so we really are starting small, and hopefully we'll learn some lessons, and then we can go to the neighbors adjacent to us and say, would you be interested in working with us and expanding the region of transferability and market transactions? And then hopefully that continues to scale up to a broader audience and region. But we are very, very limited as far as what we're able and willing to do at this point, because we want to make sure that we do it right.
Segue, I think, that perhaps a sort of a final closing statement by everyone. I guess, my question is, what were the lessons learned from this whole process, this exhaustive, multi-stakeholder process, which yielded this great tool? Real briefly, Bryce, you want to kick it off? Kind of lessons learned that maybe takeaways you got?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is always going to be stakeholder engagement, and considering, what's the makeup of your GSA, and making sure folks are at the table. And as folks make decisions about how they continue to manage within the context of SGMA and innovate in water supply management to achieve sustainability, I'm always going to stress and encourage the importance of making stakeholders at the table. I think that's one of the things that really made this project a success. Making sure that as Rosedale moved forward, there was continual involvement with donors and great input. I'll, of course, allow Eric and Christina to speak to that, but that would be my big takeaway for any predictor or GSA considering a system like this.
Eric, do you want to go next?
Nope, I want you to.
Okay, perfect. I feel like I'm so proud of the work that we've done in partnership with all these wonderful entities in Rosedale, and I think it is going to be a really helpful tool to make progress towards SGMA implementation. With that said, we don't have all the answers, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, right? And thinking about how this could be scaled, or a lot of unanswered questions still about water trading and kind of what role that can play. But I do think this tool is a really valuable foundation to really build upon moving forward. And I think it, is really, and then I'll also second Bryce's, stakeholder engagement and buy-in is really important, because the management solutions that you develop are really only as good as kind of how they're bought into and how they're supported by the users within the basin. And that's, landowners, it's also communities, it's the whole array of people that really need to be aware and buy into the decisions that are being made.
I think for us, the lessons learned is how much we don't know, and how much we still have to learn to implement SGMA in a way that causes the least amount of harm to landowners. I think as we developed this, landowners asked excellent questions and really made us think about, not just what are we doing today, but how's this going to look in 5 years? And I think there's a growing acknowledgement that we need the ability to move water around in order to empower landowners in the decisions that they're going to make with respect to land use planning. And so really for me, it was, in my mind, I had this idea of here's how it's going to work, but really when we met with landowners, they really teed up a lot of policy issues that we had to take to our board and say, okay, what do we do with this? And we learned a lot, and hopefully those lessons can be applied to others as we grow and develop this. But that was the lesson for me, is how much we still have to learn as far as policy and how this SGMA thing is going to work.
Well, time's about up. I think we'll leave it there. But I just want to thank all of you presenters for giving us your insights. Really so valuable to have all your different inputs, different perspectives. And I want to thank all the attendees. It's so exciting to have such different sectors.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. And we will make the recording available. So if you've signed up, there was a message that maybe some people couldn't get in, so I'm not sure what happened, but we'll make sure to send a note to everyone who signed up and make sure they have the recording. So thanks everyone for your time.
Indeed. Thanks everyone. Take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.